On this channel we've looked at how to select a global tracker, and we've also looked at the best performing dividend ETF. So now let's put the two head to head, and I'll put links to the original videos in the description and at the top here. The criteria that I'm going to look at is 5-year performance and volatility, which is how each fund gets from A to B. I'm going to look at fees because the fund manager always gets paid first. I'm going to look at transparency because a market cap weighted fund is easy to understand and other ones are more complicated. And then finally I'm going to look at the remit of the fund and its objectives. So what is wrong with a global tracker? Why might we look elsewhere? Well, first of all, it does have very high US exposure, about 2/3. It also has exposure to some flaky tech companies such as Tesla that don't really have a decent long-term track record. It also has low-end guff companies with very poor metrics that you might want to avoid. So the net result is that a global tracker can get caught up in market euphoria with less than ideal downside protection. Here is an example of low-end guff, a classic value trap that's lost value consistently over the last 5 years. If you look in the rearview mirror, you might think, oh, this is a bargain, but actually it has very poor prospects going forwards, and these can be found lurking at the lower end of global trackers. The classic flaky tech company is Tesla. It's incredibly volatile, very difficult to value, and it gives you limited downside protection during a market decline. Alternatives to a global tracker include a value factor exchange traded fund, but this can often have many companies that have become good value but they've got really disappointing returns over the next few years as they've lost a lot of their competitive edge. You could also look at a minimum volatility factor ETF. I'll put a link to that in the description. However, generally over time these have fairly disappointing returns. The power of an ETF can lie in its algorithm, how it can screen out companies that have never paid a dividend, and so there's no safety net to fall back on, and also companies that are once great but are now in decline. So the best performing dividend ETF is WisdomTree Global Quality Dividend Growth, ticker GGRG. It has US exposure of 56.8% versus 67.6% for a standard tracker, and it has more exposure to Switzerland, France, UK and the Netherlands than a global tracker. GGRG has overall tech exposure of about 20%, which is the same as a global tracker, but it does exclude companies that have never paid a dividend, such as Alphabet, Meta, Salesforce and Adobe, and it also excludes Amazon and Tesla for the same reasons. So when you're analysing this ETF, have a look and see whether you think that these are quality companies you want to include in your holdings or whether you'd rather give them a miss. In terms of sectors, WisdomTree Global Quality Dividend Growth is underweight in financials, so there's no Bank of America or HSBC. It's overweight in consumer staples, healthcare and industrials. The former two particularly have quite good solid dividends behind them. It's underweight energy due to ESG concerns, and it's also underweight communication services and utilities. So here are the holdings of both of the ETFs, the GGRG and the tracker. You might want to pause the video, just have a look through them, but you'll see, particularly with GGRG, there's some really good quality companies here, and they're held on a slightly different weighting, which relates more to the dividends that they pay rather than the market capitalization. And within the tracker of the top 20, there's only one that is outside of the US, which is pretty scary. Here are some performance metrics of GGRG versus a global tracker. The one I've used is SWDA. So GGRG has outperformance in terms of total return of 97% versus 77%. It also has a lower maximum drawdown, and the duration of that drawdown was only 160 trading days for GGRG, whereas for a global tracker it's 346 trading days and counting. And the fee of GGRG is 0.38%, which is double or maybe even more than double what you'd pay for a tracker. And here is the performance shown in a 5-year graph, just to summarize things. If Terry Smith ran an ETF, I wonder whether it would be the WisdomTree Global Quality Dividend Growth. And as you can see here, the performance is pretty much neck and neck, but the Dividend Growth ETF is much less volatile. This is some of the criteria that the Dividend ETF uses. So it only chooses dividend companies that have a coverage ratio of 1, meaning that earnings are greater than dividends. It has criteria around liquidity and market cap. It also uses certain quality and momentum screeners as well. And then finally, it does look at ESG. Stock selection criteria include return on equity, return on total assets, so that means it's really looking at the debt to equity ratio, checking companies don't have too much debts, and then also analysts' earning growth expectations. The weighting of companies within the ETF is based on the dividend payout over the last 12 months, so it avoids high market cap companies that hardly pay any dividends. It also caps any individual stock at 5%, and there's also country and sector caps as well that help to lower the volatility, and the fund is rebalanced annually. So what you need in your portfolio are quality compounders, and this is not revenue or profit that can be manipulated by accounting treatment. It's not even cash, because you don't necessarily get to actually see it if it's not paid out as a dividend. And also with cash, you've got timing issues, such as when you decide to pay creditors versus your year end. So with dividends, you can choose whether you want to spend the dividend that you receive or reinvest it back into the company. So it's these quality compounders you want in your portfolio, and you don't need 1,500 of them, so you don't necessarily need a global equity tracker. My conclusion is that it looks like the algorithm does work, and that the quality dividend filter does produce lower volatility and higher returns. However, we can't totally rule out luck or coincidence, or that we've missed something else that's actually driving this outperformance. And the longer the track record of GGRG, the more certain we can be as to whether we want to include it in our portfolio. I hope you liked the video. This next one might be of interest to you. Please let me know your comments and what sort of funds you'd like me to cover in the future.